China, as one of the world's largest economies, has made a rapid leap to the top over the past few decades. But soon he faced a difficult situation caused by external economic pressures. Since the introduction of tariffs by the Trump administration, the trade war has pushed discontent to the masses, leading to mass protests across the country. These protests reflected not only economic instability, but also the desire of the people to be heard, the desire to change the course of their state. Tariffs have become more than just an economic measure. They have raised important social and political questions about the country's future. In a rapidly changing world where ties between powers are becoming increasingly strained, the protests in China show how domestic politics can interact and face global changes. These actions are not just about people taking to the streets with slogans. They are about rapture for the right to life, so that the family can have a decent standard of living, so that the worker can earn his bread fairly. In this context, the protests become a cry for help and a symbol of the struggle for the right to a better life, for respect and hope. In this video, we will take a closer look at how tariffs have become a catalyst for discontent, how they have affected the lives of ordinary people, and what significance they have for the global economy and politics in general. Tariffs are financial instruments that government authorities use to regulate the flow of imported goods. These are taxes on the import of goods from other countries, which are usually imposed in order to protect domestic production from foreign competitors by increasing the cost of imported goods. Thus, tariffs can lead to higher prices for consumers, potentially reducing the spread of foreign goods and encouraging consumers to switch to local counterparts. When Trump began imposing tariffs on up to $250 billion worth of Chinese goods in 2018, it was the beginning of a large-scale economic war that caused tensions between the world's largest economies. This decision caused drastic changes not only for consumers in the United States, who began to face increased prices for appliances and clothing, but also for Chinese manufacturers, who lost important sales markets. The global economic perspective changes when tariffs begin to apply to export-dependent countries like China. This tariff structure exacerbates economic conditions, creating multi-level reactions, from the struggle for limited resources to the application of protectionist measures of intervention in domestic economies. When such protectionism takes effect, it undermines the fundamental principles of free trade, as it becomes a symbol of current geopolitical conflicts. Domestic producers may be happy to raise their prices, but on the other hand, consumer discontent is growing. Tariffs have many consequences, and their application becomes the starting point for profound changes affecting international relations and domestic politics, which eventually leads to protests and social unrest. They can dramatically change the economic landscape, and it is important to pay attention to their long-term effects. Equally interesting is how protests become a source of cultural expression. In the face of severe repression of many activists and women seeking infidelity, art, music, and other forms of self-expression appear as a reaction. These art forms are starting to be much more than just a hobby. They are becoming channels for conveying emotions that reflect people's lives and feelings. Graffiti is becoming not only a way of self-expression, but also a symbol of struggle. Drawings that were previously considered fleeting now have a deep meaning, creating images that unite the people and express through sadness, hope, and rage. New memorials are appearing, surprising and sparking discussions among the public, inspiring people to join the movement. Public art shows citizens that they are not alone in their suffering, and the opportunity to express themselves becomes even more important in conditions of fear. Music is also becoming an important element of movement. Many young artists write songs about current issues and inequality. Such a piece of music transcends the boundaries of profit and becomes a symbol of protest culture. This music, addressed to brotherhood and unity, allows the audience to find an opportunity to get closer, allowing them to reflect on everyday life and struggle. Literature adds diversity to the culture of protest. Poets and novelists are beginning to create works reflecting the feelings and hopes of the people. Literature can awaken consciousness, and it becomes an important tool in the struggle for justice. These cultural responses help bring people together, showing that during difficult times, art can become a voice that feeds the light of hope. Studying the situation in China, it is worth drawing parallels with previous protests, which also showed how deep a desire for change can unite people. The Tiananmen Square protests in 1989 are one of the most famous examples. They began with the desire of students to gain more freedom and ended with violent suppression. This experience has left a long legacy both among Protestant Tahiti and in the memory of the Chinese, reminding of how quickly a sense of hope can be destroyed. Other historical examples, such as the protests in Europe in the late 80s and early 90s, show how mass movements can lead to major changes in strange regimes and conditions. This type of activity becomes a symbol of the struggle against oppression and misunderstanding. Countries that have struggled with authoritarian regimes, such as Poland and Czechoslovakia, have shown how uniting people can lead to success. Against the background of the protests in other countries, it is becoming clear that the previous experience serves as an important lesson. From time to time, history finds its point of intersection, and movements such as the Arab Spring illustrate how a rapid uprising of peoples can affect the political structure of large regions. Each stage of the revolution shows that uncertainty can stir up the spirit of the environment and lead to changes. These stories open up possibilities for understanding. When people unite to achieve the common good, they have the power to overthrow any obstacles. These parallels provide an important context, allowing young people to take on an active role and a key place in public life. The impact of tariffs on the Chinese economy has proved to be serious and multifaceted. Given that China's economy is heavily dependent on exports, the imposition of high tariffs must have had profound and negative consequences, especially for the sector that has long served as the country's active engine. The sharp drop in exports from China began almost with the introduction of tariffs. The problems have affected millions of people working in textile, electronics, and manufacturing enterprises. Businesses began to close, without incurring heavy payments and additional fees. Hundreds of kilometers away from major cities, where factories have closed, many workers have begun to lose their jobs and become destitute. These are promising jobs that built the hope of many families, were short-term and are now becoming empty. People started asking questions about how they would feed their families, educate their children, and provide the necessary standard of living. Overall unemployment has started to rise, and this, in turn, is leading to a less predictable market. Consumer capacity is declining, leading to the closure of small businesses such as local shops and cafes that depended on customers. The social consequences are becoming clear. Local communities are collapsing, and crime rates are rising due to social stability collapsing amid economic disasters. In the context, these changes become not only economic, but also social disasters. It leads to increased insecurity and anxiety among citizens. From the discontent of the national government to internal tension, it's all connected. The fact that small businesses also end up suffering is a problem for a nation seeking to assert itself in a highly competitive economy. The protests that arise in such conditions become not just actions of discontent, but a real cry for help and documentation of public anger over economic policy. Against the background of all economic changes, there are profound social consequences. The protests serve not only as an expression of dissatisfaction with the current situation, but also as a significant signal that the peoples are ready to fight for their rights and freedoms. Economic difficulties are becoming a catalyst for social discontent, and hundreds of thousands of people are taking to the streets. Every protest is not just about the masses, it's about the stories of the people behind the slogans. They come out to try to be heard, reflecting the authorities' indifference to their problems. Although these actions may initially seem spontaneous, they are actually associated with a massive awareness of the need for change. What's next if ordinary citizens won't be able to be heard? If those who make decisions won't be interested in them? The protests become evidence of the fusion and unification of citizens around a common anger and desire to improve their lives. However, many demonstrators are facing a harsh government response. The use of force and intimidation only highlights the seriousness of the situation. When protesters are subjected to violence, it creates a domino effect. Others begin to take to the streets, realizing that their actions matter. Massacres in the streets and mass arrests of people only fuel public opinion and provide combustible material against the authorities. Nevertheless, the protests serve as a deeper social change. This is not only a struggle against economic difficulties, but also a war for human rights, where ordinary citizens are required to satisfy their legitimate rights. It becomes a moment of formation and rebirth. Society requires participation, openness, respect, and, at the very least, the ability to influence change. The topic of mass media and the internet in the context of the protests cannot be overlooked. Social media such as Weibo and WeChat are becoming fundamental in a situation where traditional media is under tight control. This creates a unique environment that allows activists to widely share their opinions and organize rallies using the power of digital technology. By being able to share their experiences, they create a sense of unity and support among users. Hundreds of videos on the platform raise the question, what is the real picture of the protests, and how do citizens perceive their rights? As they watch events unfold, communities begin to realize that their voices are getting louder, and this creates extensive connecting links in their protests. However, this approach runs into opposition. Censorship and arrests are the daily realities of the supervisory authorities. The fear of changing public opinion can be seen in government actions. Unsurprisingly, the suppression of protests through control of freedom of speech leads only to a short-term solution, as people's desire to be heard only grows. Meanwhile, social media activism is becoming an important channel of information, and its influence is growing proportionally. However, those who decide to protest are viewed as enemies of the state, and it becomes clear that resistance will pave the way to freedom one way or another. Every time the pressure increases, it only strengthens people's resolve. These historical moments show how society needs to be able to interact and respond to the suppression imposed by the authorities. The trade war cannot remain confined to just two countries. The protests that have reacted to these tariffs are becoming part of a much broader international dynamic that has implications around the world. When Trump began to impose his tariffs, many countries began to realize that this could affect their own interests. The difficulties faced by manufacturers from China affect other countries located in supply chains. Vietnam, India, and other Asian economic regions are beginning to feel increasing pressure as international companies look for alternatives in the production process. This creates a new wave of revision of economic unions, where each country feels the need to adapt to new realities. In addition, the global economy has deteriorated to such an extent that it is becoming increasingly vulnerable. Investors who closely follow events begin to worry about their investments, which leads to fluctuations in stock markets. Countries that previously relied on stable relations with China are soon starting to look for new ways to cooperate and redistribute resources based on the changing political situation. These events also serve as a reminder of how international conflicts can escalate into serious economic and political problems in the blink of an eye. The global community remains shocked by how one country can cause such drastic changes, and this does nothing to reduce tensions in the international arena. What can we learn from the protests taking place in China? First of all, we see how important it is for the future to become more open to all citizens. Everyone should be aware of the value of their voice in the community. The protests show that the reaction to the difficulties of Xi is, first of all, a community that gathers together to engage in common values such as justice and equality. And less significant is the power of unity. When millions take to the streets with a single goal, to fix the situation, they become so powerful that they can change the course of history. Solidarity is capable of doing everything possible for the purpose of common justice. Instead of paralyzing movement, difficulties become a powerful catalyst for change. The question of how modern activism responds to the challenges of the times is also important. In the face of severe repression, social libraries and new initiatives show that they are not just fighting for rights, but also striving to create a new field for interaction. Creating networks of like-minded people via the internet helps to keep the course of events moving, powerfully pouring life-giving juices into the movement. In conclusion, the protests themselves serve as a powerful reminder that a single voice can influence the face of modern societies. At the same time, their example can become an inspiration for future generations. We cannot stand by. It is time to take action, forming a new vision of justice that will be passed on to future generations. The protests in China against Trump's tariffs represent more than just economic action. They create an important political context and reflect the deep desire of citizens for a lively atmosphere, respect for rights, and responsibility on the part of the authorities. Each person in these protests has their own story, and each of them strives for a better future worthy of life. It is important to remember that despite any difficulties, protests provide an opportunity to be heard. They become the voice of many people who long for change and fight for the right to a decent life, which makes them not just statistics, but real people with real dreams. This moment in China's history serves as a reminder that external forces can have a huge impact on internal affairs, and can often lead to profound changes. These events are becoming an example not only for China, but for the whole world, of how to actively defend their rights and demand justice. It's time to support each other, unite with purpose, and keep hope alive. We are all part of this process of fighting for justice. Let's remember that change is possible, and every step taken towards freedom can affect the future. Each of us can make the world a little more just through our actions and support for each other. The protests in China are not just a single event. They are the beginning of a path to change that should be aimed at creating a more equal, humane, and open society.